Wait, I forgot to mute. Unmute! Uh, it is the same, basically. Start. I mean, in the reality, we should really have a timer. There is literally no necessity for that, anyways. Let me kill this. What? Ah, yeah. I am looking for extruded cheese. At which timer did I left this sources? 244. General, no, no, right? General, no, not general. Here, I think it was 27, 21. Okay. Hello? Where? Okay, there it is. Around here. We kind of missed something, I don't know. I stopped. That's I stopped at such a random moment that it literally makes no sense. Let me. Okay, we have this. I'm missing anything else? I mean, no, in reality, there shouldn't be that much more. So, I can stretch. I mean, I can do that somehow. 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 Yeah, I can somehow utilize. Somehow. I can do this. Pin. Pin. For how long? Until end, yeah. I'm missing something now. Ah, yeah. I wanted to do this. Tweet. Something like. What do I really. What can I even try to say? Like, do I have anything saved just in case? Let me see. I shouldn't have anything saved on the PC. Drafts. I have something kind of random. Anyways. I have to make something like what? Like what? What do we have here? What the fuck? Anyways, Hello, Sarah. I hope you're also well. No problem. I guess I hope you can rest properly. Hold on. It says. Okay. I I should have anything more to review, right? I mean, so far. Let me close this. And what the we should be having that? No. Why is my PC going so fast? What? Ah, wait. I don't do what? I don't even have that much stuff. I mean, I have the basic stuff open. I don't know. I guess it's decided to fast to overdo its work. I don't know. I have a real reason. Anyways, let me close this. How much time do you have? What? 1 minute? My God, I certainly spending time. Anyways, let me try to set it up over here. It should automatically capture, yeah. Automatically captures because it is the same window as the last time. Let me just speed this quality. I mean, well, yeah, it kind of matters. Not that much, but it kind of matters the quality at the end of the day. Even if it isn't completely transmitted, it still is taking into account. So yeah, I don't know. Anyways, okay, 18 seconds. Oh my god, Ah, I didn't even check audio. I'm a professional artist. Let me. Um, okay, I think we're good. I will guess we're good. Anyways, hello. Hello, here. Wait, we have. There it is. Hello. Hello, everybody. Here we are. After After not that much, I mean, so far we had the possibility of really streaming consistently for like a whole weekend, so very fine. What? What the fuck? Anyways, yeah, here we are. After not that long, here we are once again. So very nice, I guess. Very beautiful. Very good. Certainly not that much announcement because of it. What? Of the reason being that I didn't really have that much to say regarding why there could have not been any stream so far. Certainly, it is important to remember that stuff is also can happen outside of a stream in regards to the potato and stuff like uh, IRL stuff. So yeah, when stuff like that happens, I might not have the possibility of streaming as much as I would like. But anyways, the real point is now we have the opportunity. So now we may take advantage of that and do what we can for the sake of it, obviously. So well, I don't know. Here we are once again. Certainly nice, certainly good, certainly enjoyable, and well, on the last occasion, we had our collab, very nice also. I, yeah, the basic, very enjoyable and very good. And well, certainly it was very long. I wouldn't have expected ever to go that long, even more on a collab, because certainly to a certain degree you want people to not start themselves out so much, and you kind of desire for them to have the possibility of taking a break if they need it and all of that. So it was a, I would say, yeah, a pleasant surprise to see that we could go for that long. But aside from that, what we're going to do today and what is going to happen is the continuation, as in, obviously, the second part of the lecture analysis and the lecturing of this whole course, basically, Introduction to Psychology. We left in the middle of something on the last occasion, particularly of this. So yeah, we will have to continue with it, and we will have to retake from that. I kind of saved the where we left, but in reality we should try to go like 1 or 2 minutes farther back. Like I remember it was about emotions and all of that, and we ended up kind of drifting into a very, well, I wouldn't say deep. Oh, yeah. We simply ended up drifting into something else that was kind of unrelated to the whole video itself, the the whole lecture, or not completely unrelated, more like a hypothesis that we had and such. So yeah, and now we will have to see, and we will have to try to find how to basically continue learning what we have been analyzing before. So yeah, I wouldn't say I am forgetting anything else, and certainly I don't have that much more stuff to add, I guess. So well, yeah. Let us probably continue into this now. Let me pull this. Yeah, there it is. I need to mute this. I need to activate this. And there it is. We are capable of swapping into this. Also, I mean, why did I have the clock noise activated on this scene in particular? I mean, it is necessary for us to hear what is going on. Why did I don't know why do I even have to take that into account whenever I swap into the scene, but whatever. Here we are already, so yeah. Continuing with this, as I said before, lecture 15 in Introduction to Psychology. topic of the video, emotions and all of that. So yeah, we will see. We will see as always. Play.
Right?
There it is.
Okay, but here, here's an isolated, pre-literate tribe in New Guinea, and that smile looks like the smile of any kid you ever saw. That sadness, the sadness of any kid you ever saw, is a little bit of a disgust. Right? And so people have built up a model, something like there's things in the environment that happen that drive some sort of facial affect program. Your muscles in your face move to express over 6 or so different kinds of feelings. Cultural rules about what should you show, what should you not show in different cultures. Some faces expressions are more appreciated than others. And finally, all of that moves into the facial expression you make. So now, second question we have. So we see.
Okay, there it is. So basically, what was the last topic, or what were the last topics on the video? Now that I have a little bit more of context, is we were analyzing overall what was the similarities between, as it said here, cultures and their usage of face expressions, and how recognizable they are all around the world. And because of that, we ended up drifting to our whole hypothesis that was, yeah, I wouldn't really talk about it. It was very unrelated, certainly, at least with the video. So yeah, we drifted from there. But backtracking a little bit more, it also contained the notion that, for example, when you observe someone realizing a certain type of emotion with their face, or I wouldn't really say gesticulating, I think it is. When they gesticulate in a particular way, you can comprehend more for what thing they are going through, because they are pathways towards comprehending and connecting more with others. And it was overall kind of a spread. It didn't have that much by itself deep things. It reutilized some lessons that were already given before. I wouldn't particularly know to say why, but it did, so certainly weird. But anyways, we're here we are in another new part. This I can't really say what it's about. So yeah, let me once again press play after going back like 5 seconds to get the point better.
Finally, all that moves into the facial expression you make. So now, second question we have. So we think, to a first approximation, emotions, at least as far as we can tell, are pretty universal, but there's cultural and learned pieces as well. Do emotions have unique physiological signatures? Could we tell from your physiology what you're feeling? And there was a lot of hope that this would work, because we intuitively, emotions differ from one another. Our body feels different as we go from one emotion to another. And we use language, words like "she got hot and bothered," "you make my blood boil," "he's just letting off steam." All these are, there's different physiologies go with different feelings. And so people hope they could make decision trees like this. Let's measure your heart rate, high or low. Well, if it's high, then we get your skin temperature, and then we can tell if you're angry or fear or sad. That you could make a decision tree by looking at peripheral measures of physiology, but it never worked. It's never been strongly discriminating. People have not been able to have a physiological fingerprint for the emotion that you feel that's reasonably accurate. Yeah.
Counting as something that they could go in that tree. For instance, could they measure chemical concentrations in places?
It's possible, yeah. Here's a very good question. Here they're measuring peripheral physiology or autonomic systems, skin temperature, heart rate. Could there be other things like chemicals, right? So I'd say yes, but we just don't know them well enough, right? Or could you have brain measures that ultimately would be sophisticated enough? I can tell you that brain measures are not that good at that now, okay? But could they be someday? Yes. So yes, it's specific measures that we have. A really deep question will be, at some level, when you're fearful and I'm fearful, how identical will those be, right? Depending on our cultural background, depending on situations we've experienced. We can both agree we're scared of something, but it could be pretty different, right? Okay. So it's a really deep question, right? When in the end, how close are these things from one person to another? Now, at least as speculative as why we have emotions, and sometimes, obviously, it's help. Sometimes people think it's intrapersonal functions within us. We're organizing ourselves. What's our basic feeling? Are we basically happy or sad about something or fearful of something? So that we use that feeling as a source of information to sort of pull ourselves to say, like, this is basically where I'm at. It's a source of information for me, and it can tell me what behavior makes sense to do in this context. And then from one person to another interpersonally, what does that person feel? What am I signaling to that person? So here's an experiment, and I'll show you just a brief YouTube video on this because I think it's really cute. But it's almost a life and death experiment, although no infant was harmed in the making of this experiment. Okay.
Let me go back into this.
Other interpersonally, what does that person feel? What am I signaling to that person? So.
Okay. Here. Wait. There it is.
And then from one person.
Okay. Yeah. With that on screen, I might as well want to. I don't really see what would be necessary for us to try and discuss it, but certainly it carries a little bit more of an interest to see or to try and discuss, let's say, the probable reasons as to why we will have emotions, because certainly it doesn't seem to be properly explained so far. So to throw in something else and to have the possibility of considering also what might be inside of the own knowledge that everybody holds inside of their unaltered minds, let's say, before taking as what is presented here, supposedly facts, into consideration, to say them and to see what they carry, what they can contribute to these definitions might be interesting. So yeah, if I had to try and guess, in this case then, why emotions are necessary or not, yeah, I think it is completely different. Why do we even have emotions? I will try to assimilate them or point them towards the direction of we tend to have emotions because we see the necessity of having them, let's say, as hello, welcome, as a property, not as a property, maybe more proper to say is as a quality of quality. Is it quality? I don't really know. As a way to measure why something will be in any way good or bad, yes, but even more because we might have the necessity of attributing more deepness to things, like, I mean, kind of really hard to guess. Yeah, certainly to guess out of nowhere. The necessity of emotions might be something like, because when you can properly express why do you feel in a certain way towards something, it is that you also know why that thing is like that, because certainly you are so emotionally connected to the world that if we know that something might produce sadness instead of us, the average person might decide to avoid those things happening on their lives, because certainly we wouldn't want to feel this type of sadness anymore. So, in those cases, it is then that it becomes kind of apparent that we wish to have kind of waypoints towards the knowledge that is, okay, this is this category, therefore I know how to behave in front of it, let's say. Yes, on one hand, and on the other one, it might be something like, because when we have emotions, we do not only comprehend the world and we can attribute categories into it, but more like we might have the rational part of what we are integrated inside of us, and that allows already for a little bit of explanation about things, yeah? But it is also necessary for us to try and go a little bit deeper into it and see or not if we have something like, let's say, do I really comprehend this idea or not? Do I really hold inside of me something that can expand on what I already rationally can conceive as a reality from this thing? And therefore I give it more connectiveness towards everything else that is already inside of my map of knowledge from the rational side. Something like I wouldn't say I was going to say the complement. Emotions are the necessary uh, opposite face of rational things, because you can't be only rational and you can't. It isn't that you can't, technically speaking. It is that you shouldn't be only rational, or that you shouldn't be only emotional. You should need to have a balance between those two things, because with the guidance of both of them on their proper place, it is then that you have the possibility of seeing how much you can, in some ways, integrate the different, yeah, the outside world, let's say, something like that. And I mean, I wasn't even thinking about what is presented here, like intrapersonal and interpersonal, but I will obviously say or try to name something like it is very apparent that if you have the possibility also of taking into account that, for example, you might wish to have the chance of explaining how much of a threat something is to others, because you know that it is dangerous and because it triggers inside of you the sense of fear, or that it triggers inside of you the sense of sadness. You also want to tell people to avoid these type of experiences, or you want to warn them beforehand because some things might be unavoidable, like for example learning how to see that. I mean, there are things that seem interesting, but also if I had to say random things, I will guess to a certain extent the way in which you are told that things should be perceived also alters the way in which those things are perceived later on by yourself. Because certainly I will try to. I don't know, I have been lately thinking about stuff like experiments a lot, and I will have an interest over, for example, knowing how much of a difference it will make if somebody were to be told that a death is something incredibly amazing, and that it shouldn't be seeked necessarily, but that it can be perceived as the liberation that lets those who are born, let's say, never more suffer on this reality. Something like, now that I was trying to articulate this, I find very similar to religion, such something very similar to religion, or to a lot of religions, what is predicated on them, basically, and that is the idea of you can go to heaven, or you can go to places of incredible bliss or whatever, because in those places it is that you don't find yourself suffering anymore. But a prerequisite of accessing those places is for you to never in your whole life, um, or well, not in your whole life, more like never um, go towards death itself. It is only something that should happen to you, not something that you should force. But yeah, I mean, the point was having something structured like that would be interesting, because maybe if we were to treat it as something good, if we were to learn that it is something certainly unavoidable, the sadness that comes with, for example, grief and loss will not be so huge. But I don't know. I think I might be straying too far from the point that is what is simply the point of emotions, certainly. But yeah, I will say something like that might try to be a proper definition as to sorry, what emotions really mean and such. I guess, or why do we have them, basically, slash why won't they be necessary in any way whatsoever. But yeah, I don't think I have that much more to add so far. So let me continue. Let us continue. Yeah.
To another interpersonally, what does that person feel? What am I signaling to that person? So Here's an experiment, and I'll show you just a brief YouTube video on this because I think it's really cute. But it's almost a life and death experiment, although no infant was harmed in the making of this experiment.
What?
Okay? So what they do is this is a visual cliff. So they have infant is put on this, a very tiny baby.
Mm-hmm.
Here it's hard plexiglass. There is no danger to the baby. Okay, but there is a drop here and a drop here. Now, as the baby approaches this, they're not used to the idea of plexiglass. Even you and I would be pretty worried about that if it was on a larger scale, right? We want to be pretty sure about the strength of that plexiglass. But to the infant's eyes, they're approaching what they call a visual cliff. On the other side, I'll show you the film in a moment, is a mother. And the mother can either be showing a positive expression or a negative expression. And look what happens to the infants in this perilous situation where they see a drop, that's pretty big, okay? And how much they trust their mother's expression to know what to do. So if the mother is looking happy, like, it's okay, this is going to be great, we're having a lot of fun, 3/4 of the time the infant goes for it. If their mother looks scary, never, okay? They're making kind of a dangerous decision entirely on the facial expression of the mother and their trust that the mother knows the right thing to do and is giving them the right advice.
I mean, I will say something along the lines of, it wasn't intended for this to be connected to what I was trying to think about before, but it would certainly seem to be very much related to it. Although I don't think every single mother even mentions the concept of death to every single child, the big majority of them talks at some point or another about how much of a necessity it is for us to consider it, and how much it is, let's say, necessary for us to take it into account, or something like that, I guess. But it certainly happens that when you see those things and when you feed these ideas to your kids, you are already altering the way in which they interact with the world. So, the weird thing will be, to which extent can we translate this later on? And maybe, well, also, obviously, it is kind of necessary for the whole society to not contradict what is being presented to you, But, yeah, I don't know. Weird. Understand also for obviously.
So I mean, sometimes, everything in psychology can just seem like, oh, it's just another thing. But facial expressions are an unbelievable, powerful way that we communicate with one another. Here's an extremely clever experiment from Adam Anderson, who happened to be a postdoctoral fellow in my lab, but he did this completely independently, which is this. Here's the question. So, okay, we have some different expressions, and you could say, well, are they completely random as to what the actual expression is? We haven't even asked this. Why does a smile go one way and a frown go the other way? Does it mean anything? Or are they just arbitrary signals of different emotions that have evolved over time? And he's almost the first person I know who even asked this question. I mean, and he looked at two emotions that we'll come back to in just a little bit: fear and disgust. Okay, and he thought, well, look, it's kind of interesting what fear and disgust do. For example, fear, your eyes get bigger. Disgust, think about something really stinky, okay? You close your eyes, you sort of scrunch up your nose. Here, look at this, right? And he looked at and measured how airflow patterns and different things happen when you go into those expressions, okay? Non-arbitrary properties of an expression, right? And then he did psychological expressions. He got people to get into these expressions, and he found that if they were in a fearful expression, that they would feel like they had a wider field of view, and if it's disgust, a smaller. Now think about this for a moment. When it's fearful, do you want to feel like you want to know what's going on around you, right? Or do you want to sit back and think about, stuff? Or do you want to say like, uh-oh, right? Where do I run? What's going on? When you go into some disgusting situation, do you want to really look around a lot? Or are you kind of happy to find some way out of it, right? Okay? Same thing with your nose. Here's the air velocity that's passing through your nose when you're fearful and when you're disgusted. Now, you don't even think about that, right? Who's thinking like, I'm controlling my air velocity, right? But why do you think you might want to really sample your environment when you feel danger? Visually, in an olfactory way. Why do you think you might want to sample it? Well, you want to know what's going on. You want the information as fast as possible. Do I run? Do I duck? What do I do? Do I fight, flee? What do I do? I have moments to decide because I'm in danger, right? If you're in a disgust situation, are you interested typically in exploring the olfactory environment in as much detail as you can? Right? Okay? Usually not, right? Okay, so it's kind of interesting. So the very first time I know this, very clever, ask, where do these expressions come from? Well, maybe they tend to a certain extent to exaggerate or diminish forms of sensory input that are relevant for the emotion. So for the last little bit, I'm going to talk about.
Okay. Then I guess, yeah, it is interesting certainly, but it has a little bit of not a problem, I would say, aside of it that isn't completely explored. I guess I will say that it might be because certainly every single emotion might have so many sides to it that it leaves the possibility to the student, I guess, to analyze what every single one of those emotions does to the person. Because um, when you see that all of these things really affect the way in which you interact with the world, you might want to change the way in which you interact with it. Let's say there might be situations in which you might want to feel in a different way instead of kind of losing the chance of taking advantage of this information in this case, no? But yeah, it is very first and foremost certainly it is very interesting, and the the idea of that by itself, things really do change, even if we haven't really found explanations as to why. I guess I will guess probably I would. I mean, as always, I will hope that we haven't found explanation for these things, because if we have found explanations for them and we don't even know them as a whole society, it would be pretty weird. But, anyways, it would be very amazing to know that we haven't found explanations for them, because it seems to me, at the very least, that yeah, they are kind of complex. So, the first thing will be how much of an impressive side yeah, emotions have when you can see and realize how impactful they are on the individual, and how much of a complete alteration they produce on every single side that comes with the interaction of the world itself, let's say. And not only that, they are deeply related to the way in which we observe and we form part of this, but also they have a little bit of what I could try to call an advantage, let's say, because certainly you can apply them into your life with the knowledge. Instead of you to now, you can use them in a certain way. I will obviously propose, but the problem is how much of a capacity we have over really altering and consciously manipulating our emotions. I will propose even more, taking into consideration that most of us. Uh, hello, Panso. Yeah, I saw you. Sorry for not saying anything. Hello, but yeah, how much of a capacity we really have was what I was trying to say. Overall, really analyzing, not analyzing, altering how we feel even more when we are already so developed as human beings, let's say. But I don't know. I guess it is interesting, I will say, so far. Anyways, continuing. I am not missing anything. I hope. So yeah.
For a little while, what we know about the brain basis of some emotions. And we already talked about the idea that the amygdala plays a special role in fear, and I'll show you a couple of different ways in which that's true. So this is just sitting in front of the hippocampus, one on the left, one on the right, the core elements of your limbic system. Here's viewed from the side, the amygdala. Here's the actual amygdala from a post-mortem brain. And there's another whole level of analysis that animal researchers do that we can't touch today, which is the amygdala itself is made out of bundles of neurons called nuclei, very distinct ones that have different roles, different inputs, different outputs. And in animal research, where you can selectively influence one or the other, you can see they have quite different specific roles. In humans, we don't have that precision of control, so we sort of have some clump average statements about the amygdala, but really we're mixing together a few functions. So you already saw this picture, that animals, that mice or rats that have an amygdala removed lose the fear they ought to have of a cat. In primate studies, they found that if they have amygdala lesions, the loss of threat appreciation impairs social fitness. The animals that don't know what they ought to be afraid of get into big trouble. They lose their position in dominance hierarchies. You may know primate groups tend to have dominant hierarchies, sort of alpha male and so on. They slide down that. If they lesion the dominant male, the alpha male, the male who wins all the fights and controls the group, that animal fall down the hierarchy and become subordinate. And in the wild, they've shown that if they do lesions and return the animal to a social situation, they get rejected by the other animals because the other animals feel there's something weird about the animals, and they're often isolated, and they get to early death because the other animals are not helping them or supporting them. So, very important for learning what's dangerous. Here's an experiment with rhesus monkeys lesioned at 2 weeks as infants, returned to their mothers and tested at 8 weeks. And here's an example of something. So this is, if you show an animal a novel object, and this is how often they respond to it, young animals will often not explore it because they go, well, I don't know, that could be dangerous, right? They're waiting for their mother's expression, right? Here's the other animals with the amygdala lesions. They'll explore it. In a sense, they're fearless, but that's probably not, an ideal thing to do when you're an infant exploring the world. Or they'll put food near, food only, or food next to a play snake. Okay, snakes are dangerous for monkeys. They usually don't want to figure out at this age, is it a play monkey? Is it a play snake or a real snake? They just say, I don't really need to eat that, okay? So everybody likes the food, put the snake next to it, and the control animals go, no, I don't think so, all right? Basically, the amygdala ones, what's for dinner, right? And the answer is if it's a real snake, you're for dinner, right? Okay, so they lose the fear of things they ought to have fear of. If they have this, they lose the things, fear of unknown things, fear of things they ought to be afraid of. So the amygdala plays this really important role. Fear sometimes is maybe the best understood emotion in terms of brain processes, and maybe the most studied, partly because we've had some success in understanding what's going on, and partly because fear is maybe the emotion that's most people think is closest to survival. You fear what kills you, you fear what pains you. That's a very powerful emotion for survival and safety. And you can do fear conditioning. We talked about conditioning before in all species, from humans to primates, other mammals, fruit flies. You can do all of them have, to a first approximation, similar fear conditioning. It's as if if you're alive, you have to fear things that are scary and dangerous. So people have done fear conditioning experiments, and now you know this very well. You might hear a tone that's not scary at first. If you put it with something that you don't like a foot shock, you get fearful to the tone. And what people have discovered kind of remarkably is that you can make lesions in many parts of the brain and you don't affect that learned fearfulness to the tone. But if you make a damage in the part of the amygdala, you abolish that learning. These animals fail to learn the signal of something that is coming up to be painful and dangerous. You can even make large lesions in the cortex that doesn't affect anything. And these animals with the amygdala lesions, they have an intact, unconditioned response. When they get the shock, they jump like the other animals. They don't like it. Okay, it's not that they can't feel pain. They can't learn that the tone predicts the painful stimulus. They can't learn the warning signal of danger. There's very few patients with amygdala injury.
Yeah. I have a question. That is, how would a human react towards this? I mean, supposedly rationality should be part of this. Are we going to see if they were shocked and they learned to associate those things? Because that is my question. I mean,
only, but there's a few. So here's a patient SM who's been studied by Damasio and his colleagues. This is where the amygdala ought to be. It's a developmental disorder where this is calcified very early in development. It's not an adult lesion, but it seems to be fairly amygdala specific. And people have done a couple of experiments with these patients, and it's sort of guided our understanding of what the amygdala does in you and I. So here's one example where they did conditioning. Again, in this case, they didn't use shocks. They used a super loud boat horn. Okay, that's pretty noxious to people. People don't like it. And they preceded that with something gentle that warned you it was coming. So here's the initial response. And here's the important thing. With humans, of course, you can, well, let me just say, they manage a skin response, a galvanic skin response to the bad tones. So here's the conditioned stimulus, the response to the boat horns and the conditioning, that what predicts the boat horns. Here's the response to the baseline. And here's the performance of patients with amnesia who have the amygdala controls, who both can tell you they're responding selectively to the scary tones and also remember perfectly well. When you, at the end of the testing session, you go, what went on? And they say, oh yeah, when I got one signal, I got a horrible boat horn, and when I heard the other signal, I got nothing. Okay, it's easy, right? Okay, you do that for half an hour. You get one visual signal, that means boat horn coming up, one visual signal, nothing coming up. If you have patients who have amygdala lesions, the galvanic skin response doesn't happen, even though they tell you perfectly well afterwards what happened. So they know just like everybody else that they got a certain signal that went with a noxious boat horn, but their body is not learning that association. If a patient has hippocampal damage, their body learns that association, but they don't remember it afterwards consciously. So you can separate two kinds of learning, a hippocampal-dependent learning of the facts of the session, and an amygdala-dependent learning, which is a bodily response to learning that something is dangerous and unpleasant.
Okay. I understand the fact as it was presented, but I mean, I certainly lack more information to us. Why would the brain not be capable of associating those things? Like, my argument before was what I said. I think if we have a rationality in our side, we should supposedly have the capacity of finding out if things are related in some way or another, because we know and because we can see them being related, let's say. But what feels certainly weird is the side of somehow you can't really associate those things. I mean, why will it be that the rationality gets lost in the middle? Is it like, I mean, certainly I am only trying to comprehend it a little bit more. In this case, I will certainly say sorry for pausing, but it might be because, in a way, rationality is related to fear or to something of that sort. And because you wish to not, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to say something like, because you wish to not suffer in this world, it is that then you have the capacity of understanding the world better. If it were to be like that, then people wouldn't have the capacity of learning anything if they had, as it was shown here, an amygdala lesion. So the explanation would be something like, then maybe because when you have a lesion of that sort, what you're trying to learn can't truly be consumed or acquired, integrated into your brain. I mean, you can notice the correlation, you can even mention the correlation. Why wouldn't you have the capacity of learning? Like, I think what is kind of lacking is something like, okay, can they in any way avoid the pain, for example? Probably. Something of that sort, I guess. Like, can you somehow avoid getting shot by, I don't know, touching a button, let's say? I will argue something of that sort. In those analysis, we will really realize then if it is that certainly they can't in any way integrate those learnings. But I mean, yeah, I will guess by the simple fact that they are still alive, you can notice then that they can somehow still integrate themselves into society and they can somehow still be part of the world because they can, let's say, those who lack the fear response of the brain, they can be part of a reality and not die or kill themselves in the first occasion that they have. Because they can understand that they have objectives. I mean, obviously, aspirations and goals and the whole side of happiness and the whole side of remaining, I wouldn't simply say nice, more like remaining positive, I guess, is not related to it, and when you have a goal and when you have something of that sort, then it is that you can really achieve so many things more than what the well, yeah, that is kind of unrelated. But yeah, you have goals and you have still stuff like that because you don't have not you don't need fear to have them, let's say. But at the same time, I will kind of argue that you need them. Like, why would you believe that it is necessary for you to have a goal? I would probably believe that something like you having a goal comes only from the side of you understanding the necessity of having a goal, let's say. And if you have no fear, then how will you make sense out of why a goal would be necessary for you? I mean, it doesn't really impair the capacity of learning. Yeah, I guess certainly it lacks information, more proper information presented, or something like that. I guess I don't know. Anyways, continuing. Uh, I will probably try to seek out a little bit more of information on that sense.
Now, we often learn things like the visual cliff without having to have a boat horn and practice, right? If somebody tells you that something is dangerous, or you figure out that something is dangerous, you don't have to go through a terrible experience to pretty much decide you're not going to do it. So here's an experiment that was aimed at showing you that. So what people were showing, there's a funny human subjects wrinkle to this, I'll just tell you. This occurred at Yale, where they had a blue square came on. That means safe. You can just relax. Nothing bad's going to happen. But when the yellow square comes on, get ready. You might get a somewhat unpleasant shock. Okay? But they never give them a shock. So you're not learning that way. You just factually learn that something is safe and something is dangerous. And here's the amygdala response to the scary one, to a neutral situation, and to the one where you know, I'm safe. Okay? So you never got the shock. You never got the shock. You were just told about the shock. You didn't have to get it, but you're a human. You can figure this out. And your amygdala is going, I can just figure out that's dangerous, that's baseline, and that's the absence of danger, positive safety, okay? And the Yale IRB, hilariously, I think, said that, but you're deceiving the people because you tell them might get a shock and they never got a shock, so you have to give them one shock at the end of the experiment. So so dutifully, the experimenters gave them one shock after the experiment was over, so they were honest. Because during the experiment, as they measured the brain activation and the amygdala responding to the threat of pain without any pain being associated, right? We're smart. We can learn something is dangerous just by thinking it through, and it engages the same part of the brain that learns by actual painful experience. Now, how about memory? So here's the way this study was done. People viewed a slide story with an emotional middle section. So an example would be this. Parents are home, having breakfast with a kid. Parents go to work, kid walks to school. Kind of tragically, but these are all slides. Again, nobody was injured. Child is hit by a car. Something high arousing happens in the middle of the story. Everybody runs to the hospital. The kid is okay. When people ask a week later or something like that, I think a week later, tell me about the stories I told you last week. There's a number of stories. People have best memory for the part where something highly arousing happened, like the child was hit by a car. That makes sense, right? Kid having breakfast, kid okay, car accident with a kid. You're aroused and you remember that better. So emotion is amplifying memory. The patients with the amygdala lesions don't have that memory bump based on emotion. Emotion is not enhancing their memory. And you can imagine that there's a pretty good reason for emotions to enhance memory, right? If something is fearful, delightful, horribly disgusting, those are all good reasons to remember, let's do that again if it's great. Let's avoid that if it's terrible, right? Okay? I mean, it's a good idea for emotions to drive memory formation. And in your brain and mine, it appears the amygdala has this role of transforming emotions into memories. Now, we also talked about 6 facial expressions, and I showed you this before. The same patients have trouble in recognizing fearful.
I mean, I kind of wanted to mention this a little bit, just in case. It certainly is obvious that you will have kind of like the necessity to integrate the different things that come with information presented to you in the sense of, let's argue, informational luggage, as it shows you what would be good or what would be bad. The only kind of weird thing is that certainly we can very much control how we let these emotions take control of our experiences most of the time, I will argue. But what still seems, funnily enough, part of a concept that might need more delving, let's say, because I don't think it is fully fledged, is the side of maybe in some areas we can decide or believe that, yeah, emotions are necessary and emotions can truly achieve a better understanding of concepts, no? But where it might be necessary for you to not have them, because I will believe certainly that we can't avoid them, and the counterpoint will be something like, but why will it be necessary for us to not have emotions? We can't in any way avoid having them, and we can't in any way not allow emotions to exist. Like there are many different, let's say, ways of thinking that completely go into the idea of you need to allow emotions to exist as much as they can. Maybe you don't need to let them take the control of who you are, but you need to relinquish the control itself of emotions in the sense of you can't not let emotions happen. Um, but yeah, I guess it is interesting for to say the very least. But yeah, maybe it only is born from a set of not proper understanding. Maybe what can I mean? It doesn't really. Once again, it doesn't really talk about why somebody who has no fear can still learn anything at all. I wouldn't see the possibility of somebody learning real if they didn't in any way have an understanding about these concepts and such. But I don't know. I don't know. I guess it has a side to it that is more rational than what meets the eye. Yeah. Anyways,
In your brain and mine, it appears the amygdala has this role of transforming emotions into memories. Now,
hello.
we also just talked about 6 facial expressions, and I showed you this before. The same patients have trouble in recognizing fearful facial expressions. So kind of the amygdala, in so many different ways, learning, memory, perception of faces, seems to play this huge role in fear. And kind of interestingly, because you might have the intuition, and this, a lot of this came from Freud, that a lot of our emotions are happening kind of under our conscious awareness, okay? We almost discover them after, like, why am I angry at this person, or why am I so happy? We have to think it through almost. If you show subliminal fearful faces versus happy faces, subliminally presented so people can't tell you what the face expression was, still, they turn on the amygdala. So unconscious perception of a fearful face engages the amygdala. You don't have to go through consciousness. Cortical blindness, we talked about that early in the course, where you're blind in one visual field. And yet individual patients, a couple of them with cortical blindness, if they were shown a fearful stimulus in the cortically blind field, still turned on in the cortically blind field, the amygdala, for a fearful face versus a happy face, which indicates that a non-conscious subcortical pathway that doesn't intersect with conscious thought or cortex is sending information from your eyes to your amygdala, okay, a different pathway. And people have speculated that, maybe again, because fear is survival and danger, we might have a superhighway of information that sends dangerous information immediately to your amygdala. It doesn't wait for you to think a lot, so to speak, in your cortex. Boom, danger, 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 even before you process the rest of the situation. So we talked about fear and the threat in the amygdala. I'll just say a word about disgust. People think that maybe a reason, there's many reasons things we can be disgusted at or about, but that maybe in terms of evolution, it might have been a pretty good signal for contaminated food that makes you sick, right? Things to avoid that makes you sick. And it turns out another part of the brain called the insula is pretty important for that. So here's the amygdala left and right. Here's the insula that you have left and right in purple, outlined in purple. And again, just like with the amygdala, patients with lesions of the insula don't recognize facial expressions, and imaging-wise, if you see a disgusted face, that turns on that part of the brain as well. So those are the best understood brain pieces of emotion by far. So now those are patient things. So let me turn for a moment now, lastly, to a few imaging studies of
Wow.
typical people and some topics on emotion. So here's the terrible pictures from 9/11. The horror of the moment, and we always imagine we'll remember, and we've talked a little bit about this in Flashbulb Memories, emotionally things correctly for a long time. The horror of that moment the king went on, I shall never forget. This is Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass.
Yeah,
You will, though, he
wow.
said, if you don't make a memorandum of it, and now you know that Lewis Carroll was talking about the amygdala, right? You didn't know that before, but you know that now, because if the amygdala isn't there, the emotional intensity doesn't make the memory more permanent or more powerful. So Larry Cahill, UC Irvine, did the first brain study on this topic. And what he did is he showed people, students, while they were getting PET scanning, positron emission tomography, films, short films that were either powerfully emotional or neutral. And then he brought them back 3 weeks later, and here's what he found. The more activation there was in the amygdala, each square here is a different person, the more they remembered the emotional stuff. But it didn't matter for neutral things. So the amygdala seems unimportant for neutral information, but the more it was engaged, the more they remembered emotional information. So this is sort of evidence in the typical human mind of a relationship between the amygdala and emotional memories. So here's an experiment, actually that we did at Stanford, where we show people stimuli that were either neutral.
What? I comprehend the idea, basically. I mean, we have already talked about it. Emotions alter the way which memories are produced. I mean, yeah, I can get a little bit why it is necessary to talk about it now. Because before it was only mentioned as something that happened on the opposite end, like if you don't have if you don't have emotions, you don't really remember that much. But if you have emotions, you now can remember better, is the argument. Like, yeah, wow, certainly if a tomato is not blue, it might not really mean that a tomato is red. So we also need to tell you that a tomato really is red. Wow. Okay.
Somewhat negative, and I'm going to show you something that's very negative. If you don't want to look, close your eyes for a moment. Close your eyes. Here we go. Very negative. Okay. Sorry. All right. It turns out if we don't show you something that negative, it's hard to get your brain pumped up. This is, it doesn't have to be all be that sad, but it has to be pretty intense. Okay. So we show you things like this, and we record your brain response to each of those. And here's what we do. We ask you to tell us how bad is this. So the baby picture was bad, right? Okay. For most people.
What?
We wait 3 weeks, pretty long time, and then we test your memory for the scenes from before. Okay, we test your memory 3 weeks later, pretty long time. And here's what we see, two things. So one, in the left amygdala in this study, here's what you rated as terrible, pretty bad, somewhat bad, and neutral. So the amygdala is responding to your subjective sense of terribleness. Now, you know, we were really looking at arousal and negativity. We didn't look at positive ones. I can tell you in other studies, and here's a trick in research. I'm going to tell you now. I only have a couple more slides, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about insider things on imaging, just so you understand imaging is as human and fallible a form of research as anything, which you might suspect anyway. Right? We show these things, and we got these responses. Okay, so that's going with your subjective sense of how bad films are. And then when we tested people's memory, what we also found was that memory was best when we got the biggest amygdala response. So that's just like you heard before. Okay, so that all seemed fine. The ones that lined up with the prior result. But here was a slight surprise and a thing that followed, and they still get cited fairly often. It's the research that I've been affiliated with gets still cited most often in newspapers and magazines. So anyway, so this was a study you saw before, and the thing I didn't emphasize to you was that this was in the right amygdala, in the right hemisphere. Doesn't really matter, it just happened to be that. Our study at Stanford was in the left hemisphere. This is where we were getting the emotion memory responses.
Oh my God.
And so we were very deep scientists, okay? And we said, what could be going on? Why is Larry Cahill at UC Irvine getting it in the left amygdala? The more active it is, the more you would remember emotional information. And why are we getting it in the right? Why is he getting the right amygdala and we getting the left amygdala? Okay. So we took a piece of paper and we wrote down the different things that people had found. Oh, the story I was going to tell you is about Stefan Haman's study. So Stefan Haman at Emory did a study where he said, okay, all this amygdala responds to negative things. Does it also respond to positive things? That's a good question, right? And the answer is yes. But it turns out in many experiments it doesn't look that way, because you saw, for those of you who looked at horrible-looking baby picture, what would be an equal, positive, powerful picture? Let's try this one. Everybody agrees it's cute when there's little children around a birthday cake. Okay? Smile, I see smiles. All right. Powerful, unless it's your kid maybe. Powerful image. powerful as the face of the infant? No, okay? So it's very hard to get, it's a really interesting thing. It's very hard to get positive stimuli that are as potent as negative stimuli. It's just, you can get a million negative stimuli from the internet, and it's very hard to get very positive ones. Okay, having said that, we said let's just think about the negative ones for the moment. So, we are...
I mean, I think it isn't really the best place to stop but for a second, but it certainly has a tiny amount of, let's say, knowledge inside of it that might be interesting to resolve. Because it is true that it is hard to find anything minimally equal to what can be called as negative on the opposite end, or obviously positive, but it is also real that you can alter the way in which you perceive those things. And when you are trying to activate inside of you the quality capacity of not being so unnecessarily focused on what only encompasses the negative sides, then it is that you can find more positive events and memories and parts of life, I guess, that could be as equally powerful as the negative ones. I mean, the point here still remains that having overall emotions is better than not having them, and that having them is always better, in this case for memory. But yeah, I wouldn't simply say that fear needs to be the only motivator factor of anything like this. I would say. But anyways, so far, continue. I think I might not be missing anything.
Our studies were fMRI, PET. Ours were all with women, and these were all with men. And you could go, well, why did that happen? Okay, so it's half women and half men. Because these were positron emission tomography. That involves injecting radioactive stuff into people to do that kind of imaging. And many IRBs say, well, let's not have women do it because they could be unknowingly pregnant. They could be. And we shouldn't be giving radioactive stuff just for an experiment. Okay? You could have debates about that, but that's what the thought. Why not let the men get their radioactive stuff? Okay, we don't really need them. Right? So when we did the study, we said, well, these were all with men. It seems in fairness we should do it with women too. We just thought it seemed fair, kind of. We didn't have any big thought about that. And and again, we were getting left amygdala and they were getting right amygdala. Pictures or films, different, and this caught our eye that we had done studies with women, we were getting left amygdala, they did it with men, with right amygdala. So deep scientists that we were, Larry Cahill had said, I'll test men and women, and we said, we'll test men and women, and here's what we found. And these are averages, but one critical thing that we discovered, we didn't know this, is that to the extent, and these are averages, of course these are averages, that you compare men and women, on average, women have better memory for emotional life events, faster production of autobiographical to memories to cues, more accurate in dating memory. So these dating studies are pretty useful because you never know how accurate a person is when they have a memory for something. What they do in the dating studies is they have people who are dating keep diaries, for example, in the fall semester, okay? And presumably those are reasonably accurate. They're filling them in every day. And then, things happen over the holidays, and some people remain dating and some don't, right? So you go back to them in March and you go, in your fall, when the two of you were going out, tell us about what you did in November, and and they can say who's more accurate, okay? And they have almost a virtual record because they have the responses that the men and the women put down that day. And on average, these are averages, the women were more accurate, and wives score higher than husbands on vividness of memories for first date, last vacation, recent argument. Okay, so these are all averages. There's lots of overlap, but on average that way. And so Larry Cahill went and did this thing, and sure enough, again, as he found before, for men, the more they turned on the right amygdala, the more certain they were to remember negative films. And for women, the more they turned on the left amygdala, the more certain they would remember negative films, on average. Now, a thing to know is, on average, again, when you have people rate the kinds of pictures we use, how do you think with your, here it is, and this is one example where your stereotype guesses probably play out for the averages. Who rates this as more scary? Or who says it's more scary, men or women? Okay. So, or positive or negative, I should say positive or negative. So here's a woman not finding this a particularly, on average, and there's a range of responses, not finding this particularly positive picture. Here's men going, pretty cool, what DVD did that come from? Okay. So, people are always asking, like, what does this really mean? And men just knowing they have to do this or whatever the question, who knows? Okay, there's no answer to this about whether it's social things or biology. It's probably, certainly social things are a big part of the story. When we have people rate the pictures in the scanner, here's the women rating, here's the worst pictures, and look at the men, they're less willing to rate these pictures as bad. Again, psychologists, who see these data, say, well, maybe the men think you're never supposed to rate them as bad because, you know, because we're tough guys and nothing's so bad, right? I mean, I don't know, who knows, okay? But this is the ratings. Now, if we look at the activation of men and women on the left as they rate them, the worse they rate it, the more intense they find it, the more they turn on their left amygdala. So at the moment they're rating them, men and women look very similar. But when we relate it to their memory, two things happen. First, the women did have superior memory to the men. These were Stanford undergraduates, probably not that dissimilar on average to the people in this room. And quite strikingly, as you saw it, activation in the right hemisphere predicted memory in men and the left hemisphere for women. I know there's been a lot of right and left, but here we think was the message, and you know, it's kind of stood the test of time a little bit on average. So what you see here is the part of the left amygdala turn on for women as they're rating it, more intense, the more active, in relation to whether they form a long-term memory, the more active, the more likely to remember it, and kind of the physical overlap of the two. In men, more active in that amygdala on the left during the rating, but doesn't seem to be involved in memory formation. In the hippocampus, again, overlap, no apparent overlap in the men. So what happens literally in the brain, I mean, literally as far as we can measure it, in women on average, there was more overlap between the parts of the brain engaged as you evaluate something and the parts of the brain that make the memory of that. And in men, on average, it was as if, here's my emotional rating on the right, and here's what I'm going to remember on the left. Kind of a separation of those processes in the most simple sense. Now, here's a huge question. Does this brain imaging study, tell us anything about whether this is in the genes of boys and girls as they're born, or a consequence of socialization, or both? It's incredibly intuitive for people to think that if you see it in the brain, it's hardwired and genetic, or hormonal, or something, okay? Brain imaging data never tells you that. It never tells you that. It just tells you by this age, this is what's going on. And you don't have to know much psychology to know that we're all hugely influenced, to varying degrees, but we're all hugely influenced by social influences on what it is to be a male or female in our families, in our cultures, in our societies. Whether something's in your genes or in your culture, it shows up in your brain, right? Okay. And we can't tell those two things apart. Is this anything to do with how we're born? Is this anything to do with how Hollywood pitches, movies that are about video game battles versus chick flicks, and how, how they're pitching that and trying to tell us we're supposed to like something, who knows? We can't tell if it's social or genetic at all.
Okay, I mean, I think, yeah, there are two things mainly. Let's leave this argument before continuing with it. I certainly see why this part in particular will be interesting to consider. I have also the knowledge, I think it wasn't presented here, but just in case, let's assume it was. Certainly with a woman, it happens that they have the capacity of observing threats more and being capable of recognizing them more, because it kind of becomes a necessity for them. You certainly would wish to have the capacity of noticing that something bad will happen to you, and that something bad is not only going to happen to you, but also to those who are near to you, because it comes apparent when you take into account that not only the woman exists by herself, but also is the main individual who is responsible for the caring obviously, of a child. So it is more necessary for them to take into account how many things could go wrong for their offspring into consideration on one side and on the other. I would say probably to a certain extent that, yeah, because it was kind of pushed to them. I mean, why will you not take care of what you have? Certainly, like, sorry for saying it so incredibly basic before. Why would a woman not be responsible for her child in the eyes of a more basic life form, let's say, not simply on a human, more like why would a monkey care, a male monkey will care for his offspring if they can simply go and have more offspring, something like that, I guess. On one side, that seems to be very reasonable with this, and not simply reasonable, it seems to show better why it happens. And it seems to lead more into those conclusions and let's then be more apparent, let's say. I would believe on that. The only kind of problems or that appears might be the consideration itself of somehow how these things can be not so well interpreted on the sense of why memory activates more. I was thinking that in the same line of what I said before, now that you can recognize threats, you might as well wish to also uh, hold those memories better. The only problem is why would a man not have that much of a capacity? Because particularly in this what is it? In these pictures, you can see that there is memory being incredibly activated on a female, while the male has almost no memory activation on their side. Uh, I wouldn't have the capacity, obviously, of explaining it or trying to reason as to why it happens in this case. The rating itself and the capacity, as I said before, of observing a threat seems apparent. But if I had to come up with a possible explanation, it would be something more like, no, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. Or everybody lives in a society. I was going to say something like, because animals might tend to isolate more when you are a female than when you are male, that might be an explanation, but in reality, most animals live in herds and live in packs. So it wouldn't really make sense to argue that, particularly because of that, it is then that you can try to say men don't have that much of a necessity of remembering things. Uh, yeah, that seems the only puzzling part, let's say. But yeah, the rating itself seems logical. And I mean, it is better to overrate a threat in most of the cases than to really let it be not so important and fell prey of that thing which you as an individual didn't take the proper responsibility of observing as something bad. Let's say, um, is there something else that I might be missing? Let me, yeah, give us a go.
Ages you brain. I mean, literally.
Let me go back a little bit more.
In relation to whether they form a long-term memory, the more active, the more likely to remember it, and kind of the physical overlap of the two. In men, more active in that amygdala on the left during the rating, but doesn't seem to be involved in memory formation. In the hippocampus, again, overlap, no apparent overlap in the men. So what happens literally in the brain, I mean, literally as far as we can measure it, in women on average, there was more overlap between the parts of the brain engaged as you evaluate something and the parts of the brain that make the memory of that. And in men, on average, it was as if, here's my emotional rating on the right, and here's what I'm going to remember on the left. Kind of a separation of those processes in the most simple sense. Now, here's a huge question.
Okay. Yeah. There is not that much to really add. I mean, what? Yeah. I don't know. I can't really try to explain it, I guess. Yet I don't have the capacity for trying to put words into this concept in particular. Sorry for that. Hey, anyways, this is also interesting.
Does this brain imaging study, tell us anything about whether this is in the genes of boys and girls as they're born, or a consequence of socialization, or both? It's incredibly intuitive for people to think that if you see it in the brain, it's hardwired and genetic, or hormonal, or something. Okay? Brain imaging data never tells you that. It never tells you that. It just tells you by this age, this is what's going on. And you don't have to know much psychology to know that we're all hugely influenced, to varying degrees, but we're all hugely influenced by social influences on what it is to be a male or a female in our families, in our cultures, in our societies. Whether something's in your genes or in your culture, it shows up in your brain, right? Okay. And we can't tell those two things apart. Is this anything to do with how we're born? Is this anything to do with how Hollywood pitches, movies that are about video game battles versus was it chick flicks? And how, how they're pitching that and trying to tell us we're supposed to like something, who knows? We can't tell if it's social or genetic at all.
Okay, there it is. I was thinking about a supposedly argument to try and respond to this question because I observed it as something that might have something to take into consideration when it comes to these ideas, and that is certainly, although we don't really have the capacity of knowing if they are that much influenced because of the world, or if they are already predestined to work like that, I don't really see that much of a difference when it comes to the discourse towards males have these functions and females have these functions. There is no part in which the world tells the male, for example, that it isn't necessary for them to remember things, and that it isn't necessary for them to let their brain integrate memories in any way or develop them itself furthermore. Obviously, the counter argument is, or the counterpoint is also the same. There is also no part where a female is told that they by themselves need to remember more. The only main difference I would say that exists is when you are trying to integrate, or when you take into account, the side of if you are going to have a child, you might want to be capable of giving it the information that you hold inside of yourself, because we don't tend to explain that much socially speaking. Certainly we are not that much active in that sense about everybody should be capable of telling their kids as much truth as they can about the world, because kids tend to follow more those who are their parents that complete strangers on the street, let's say. Certainly we don't have those particular capacities, but still we have capacities like, for example, telling them what will be beneficial and what will be good, and if they take our counseling as true or not, that is completely out of our control, let's say. But we still have some capacities over that, I guess. Also, sorry. The other part of this is everybody who wants to have a child, it doesn't really mean that only the mother should be responsible for the child in this case. At least in the society in which we live nowadays, we don't really profess a message that goes back to what I was saying before. We only need to mention or to take into consideration what a female might do with her child. It is also the responsibility of the father itself or of the male to take to play an active role in the process, in the growing process of their child. And I might believe, and I might try to counter what I said, just in case, with the idea of maybe in some cases it happens that, for example, by inserting the idea of, in society, the one who should have been most of the time the breadwinner was the father, and the one who should have been in charge of teaching stuff and remaining in the house was the woman. Maybe because of something like that, it is then that we can conclude that this type of stereotypes consolidate these ideas. I wouldn't have a reason as to why it works like that. I mean, in some cases, society has strange ideas, and I guess I can see and I can try to add that probably a good reason for that idea itself to exist is because certainly in the older eras, let's say in the what is it, like 200 years ago or so, when this was a lot more popular, most of the jobs were physically inclined, let's say, and required people to put themselves at risk. And in these cases, yes, it was better for the men to die and for the men to lose their lives in the work. Because if the child doesn't have the mother, there are so many things that go wrong with it that it is necessary for the mother to stay as safe as they can. And in that concept, it is that it will be appropriate for the men to be the ones who put their life at risk, let's say. I wouldn't believe that society has thought that deep about it even more in those times. I will probably counter with certainly they weren't stupid. But I wouldn't believe that they really put that much thought into it. Anyways, so. But I mean, still, it makes sense when you see it from that perspective that it was very dangerous to be working. I mean, you wouldn't want your sorry, you wouldn't want the woman to work in a brick factory, let's say, because the risk of getting crushed by a randomly falling brick or by a whole pile of bricks is bigger. And if you know that the possibility is there, you might as well not want the woman to lose their lives, let's say. So it becomes kind of a responsibility for you to be the one who has to go to work and who has to put themselves in the fire line, let's say, for the sake of maintaining the safety of your child. And to do it the best, you first and foremost need to keep your woman also, let's say, safe in this argument in particular. But, I mean, what else can be said about this? I mean, yeah, I still don't think it is completely marked by society like that. In the other era, for example, when we were simply farmers and gatherers, you could still have a woman farming, for example. It will make probably more sense to only have women farming because it will make them be at less risk than if they were hunting, probably. But it doesn't mean that they did no job at all. I don't know. Kind of weird, still, I guess. And I am already talking too much random stuff as if I had any real knowledge about what I am spewing words about. So yeah, that's everything so far. Also, kind of incorrectly, I hang around in the wrong scene. Sorry, but yeah, that's it so far, I guess. Very understandable. I mean, as always, very digestible, and well, better for that for those things to be like that than to have a hard time with them, I guess. But yeah. Happily enough, we're done with this. It only took like 5 hours, this one, but we're done with this video. let's see if we can make the next one that also lasts an hour, not take 5 hours to digest properly, I guess. My man. But yeah. Anyways, so far we're done here. Let me. Yeah, I don't really have that much to add. Certainly. Give me just in case a second to think. I wouldn't believe that we have anything more to say, but yeah, so far we are fine. That is all I can conclude. As always, it was a very enjoyable occasion to be here. So let's see what we can do next that can also be as good as this, or even better, if possible, as always, to reach even higher frontiers, let's say. So yeah, I don't know. Now, that is what should be your main concern. Let us go somewhere else and let us get ourselves entertained with something else because for so far we are certainly done. Well, yeah, not that much more to add. I would believe. So, so let me do this. Um, okay, there it is. As always, then we're going to finish with a raid, and in this case, yeah, as always, thanks for being here, thanks for watching, thanks for looking, thanks for everything. Remember to stay safe, remember to stay nice, remember to hydrate, to sleep, to rest, to everything. Um, and well, yeah, we're going to say goodbye so far. We're going to give give us a chance to do a lot of dimension things. And well, whenever we can, we're going to get back here to do something else interesting. As I said, as equally or even more as this one experience. And well, at least if we don't, we will have the notion that we enjoyed what we did now. And well, as always, thanks, lurkers, pod watchers, viewers, everyone. Thanks once again. Obviously, in particular, thanks to Bonkum and Steve Panso for being here. And Sarah Vitum also, sorry for forgetting. And well, yeah, now, main idea. We're going to read who Burial Rosa, who is doing an art stream. Well, yeah, that's everything so far. Thanks once again. Remember to stay safe, to stay nice, to stay hydrated, to rest if it is needed, and whenever we can, we're getting back here. If we don't, at the very least, we are going to live knowing that we're happy. Thanks for everything. Goodbye. Now, raid.